everyone. Today we're going to be continuing Chapter 10 by starting Section 2, which is urine formation in the nephron. Before starting Section 2, I'm going to recap what we did in Section 1. In Section 1, we learned that the human excretory system is responsible for removing liquid waste from the body. The excretory system also regulates the acid-base balance and the water-salt balance of the blood and secretes some hormones. We also learned that the kidneys are the primary excretory organs. They are organized into 3 regions: the renal cortex, the renal medulla, and the renal pelvis. The kidneys are composed of millions of functional units called nephrons that filter the waste from the blood and produce urine. We also learned that urine leaves the kidney through tubes called ureters, and it passes through the bladder and exits the body through urethra. Section 2 focuses about the urine formation in the nephron. The nephrons are a microscopic tube-like filtration unit found in the kidneys that filter and reabsorb various substances from the blood, and it produces urine. The upper portions of each nephron are located in the renal cortex of the kidney, while the lower portions are located in the renal medulla of the kidney. Any substances that are secreted from the nephrons enter the surrounding tissues of the kidney. Most of these substances either return to the bloodstream through a network of blood vessels, or they leave the body in the form of urine. There are 4 processes that are needed to the formation of urine. The first process is the glomerular filtration, which is the process that results in the movement of water and solutes except for proteins. They move from the blood plasma into the nephron down a pressure gradient. The second process is tubular reabsorption. It's the process in which water and unuseful solutes are reabsorbed from the filtrate in the nephron and transported into capillaries for reuse by the body. The third process is tubular secretion, which is the process that moves additional waste and excess substances from the blood into the filtrate in the nephron, and it uses mainly active transport. The last process is water reabsorption, which is the process of removing water from the filtrate in the nephron and returns it to the body for reuse by body systems. There are 2 factors that contribute to the glomerular filtration. The first one is permeability of capillaries of the glomerulus, and the second one is the blood pressure. For the first one, the capillaries of the glomerulus have many pores in their tissue walls. They are large enough to allow water and most of dissolved substances in the blood plasma to pass easily through the capillaries and into the Bowman's capsule. However, they are small enough to prevent proteins and blood vessels from entering. For the second factor, which is blood pressure within the glomerulus is about 4 times greater than it is in the capillaries anywhere else in the body. The great rush of blood through glomerulus provides the force of filtration. As you can see in this picture, the pores in the capillaries of glomerulus and the filtration slits allow water, glucose, vitamins, amino acids, ammonia, urea, and ions from the blood to pass through into Bowman's capsule. For the tubular reabsorption, about 65% of the filtrate that passes through the entire length of the proximal tubule is reabsorbed and returned to the body. The proximal tubule is a tubular portion of the nephron that lies between the Bowman's capsule and the loop of Henle. Its main function is reabsorption of water and solutes and secretion of hydrogen ion. The tubular reabsorption involves both active and passive transport mechanisms. The proximal tubule contains many mitochondria which use the energy-releasing power of ADP to drive the active transport of sodium ions, glucose, and other solutes back into the blood. Negatively charged ions tag along passively, attracted to the electrical charge on the transported substances. Water follows the ions by osmosis, and it's reabsorbed into the blood flowing through capillaries. As I said in the last slide, reabsorption of nutrients including glucose, sodium, and potassium occurs in the proximal tubule. The nutrients are actively reabsorbed, and the negatively charged ions, for example chloride, are passively reabsorbed by electrical attraction. Water is also reabsorbed by osmosis. And here in the picture provided, it shows you how the nutrients leave the proximal tubule to the capillaries through active transport and passive transport, and water leaves through osmosis. In this part, we're going to focus on the loop of Henle and the proximal tubule. The loop of Henle is a tubular portion of the nephron that lies between the proximal tubule and the distal tubule. Its main function is reabsorption of water and ions. As the descending limb of the loop of Henle plunges deeper into the medulla region, it encounters an increasingly salty environment. The cells of the descending limb are permeable to water and only slightly permeable to ions. As a result of the salty environment of the medulla and permeability of the descending limb, water diffuses from the filtrate to the capillaries by osmosis. As water moving through the descending limb leaves the filtrate, the concentration of sodium ion inside the tubule increasing, which results in the bottom of the loop to reach its maximum concentration. As the filtrate continues to the ascending limb, the permeability of the nephron tubule changes. The thin portion of the ascending tubule is now impermeable to water and slightly permeable to solutes. Sodium ions diffuse from the filtrate along their concentration gradient and passes into nearby blood vessels. At the thick-walled portion of the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, sodium ions are moved out of the filtrate by active transport. This transport of sodium out of the filtrate has two consequences. First, it helps replenish the salty environment of medulla, which aids the absorption of water from the filtrate and the descending limb. Second, the removal of sodium ions from the filtrate in the thick-walled portion of the tubule makes the filtrate less concentrated than the tissues and the blood in the surrounding cortex tissue. By this point, about 2/3 of the sodium and water from the filtrate has been reabsorbed. So to recap what I said in the last slide, in the first part of the picture, water diffuses from the filtrate into surrounding capillaries. However, solutes diffuse in the opposite direction. In the second picture, the ascending limb of the loop of Henle is not permeable to water. Solutes diffuse from the filtrate into the surrounding capillaries. And finally, in the last part of the picture, active transport of sodium and passive transport of other ions occur in the thick segment of the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. There is no reabsorption of water in this part of the nephron. Tubular reabsorption and secretion in the distal tubule. The active reabsorption of sodium ions from the filtrate into the capillaries depends on the needs of the body. Passive reabsorption of negative ions such as chloride occurs by the electrical attraction. The reabsorption of ions decreases the concentration of the filtrate, which causes water to reabsorb by osmosis. Potassium ions and hydrogen ions are actively secreted from the bloodstream into the distal tubules. Also, hydrogen ions are necessary in order to maintain the pH level of the blood. The distal tubule is a tubular portion of the nephron that lies between the loop of Henle and the collecting duct. Its main function is the reabsorption of water and solutes and the secretion of various substances. Other substances that are not normally part of the body, such as penicillin and other medications, are secreted from the blood into the distal tubule. This diagram here shows how water is transported by osmosis and how sodium is transported by active transport and how chloride is transported by passive transport. And the reabsorption of water and ions continues in the distal tubule and the collecting duct. The collecting duct extends deep into the medulla, and that's why the concentration of ion along its length increase. The concentration of ion is the result of the active transport of ions from the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, which causes the passive reabsorption of water from the filtrate in the collecting duct by osmosis. If blood plasma is too concentrated, the permeability of water in the distal tubule and the collecting duct is increased. This causes more water to be reabsorbed into the surrounding capillaries in order to conserve water in the body, which is when a person is dehydrated. Also, in both the collecting duct and the distal tubule, hormones control reabsorption and secretion. The reabsorption of water in the collecting duct causes the filtrate to become about 4 times as concentrated by the time it exists in the duct. By the end, this filtrate is now called urine. Right now, I'm going to recap everything that I said in this lesson. The process of urine formation starts with the glomerular filtration, which is when water, salts, nutrient molecules, and waste molecules move from the glomerulus to the inside of the glomerular capsule. These small molecules are called the glomerular filtrate. The second process is the tubular reabsorption, which is when the nutrient molecules, sodium ions, and other solutes are actively reabsorbed from the proximal tubule into the capillary network, while water flows passively. The third process is tubular secretion, which is when certain substances, such as hydrogen ions or penicillin, are actively secreted from the capillary networks into distal tubule. And the last one is water reabsorption. Water is reabsorbed from collecting duct by osmosis, and it increases the concentration of the filtrate. So this part is to summarize which parts of the urine formation use active transport and which part use passive transport. The proximal tubule uses active reabsorption of all nutrients, including glucose and amino acid. It also uses active reabsorption of positively charged ions such as sodium and potassium calcium. And it uses active secretion of hydrogen ions. Proximal tubule also uses passive reabsorption of water by osmosis and negatively charged ions such as chloride, bicarbonate by electrical attraction to positively charged ions. The second part, which is the descending loop of Henle, does not use any active transport. However, it uses passive reabsorption of water by osmosis. The ascending loop of Henle uses active reabsorption of sodium ions and passive reabsorption of potassium ions. The distal tubule uses active reabsorption of sodium ions and active secretion of hydrogen ions. It also uses passive reabsorption of water by osmosis and negatively charged ions such as chloride and bicarbonate. It also uses passive secretion of potassium ions by electrical attraction to chloride ions. Lastly is the collecting duct. It does not use active transport, however, it uses passive reabsorption of water by osmosis. Thank you.